Hello, everybody. Welcome to the FY22 CoC Special Unsheltered NOFO Program Competition Bidders Conference. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Just want to make sure folks can get into the webinar and that we're set to go. So just hold tight. We should get started in the next 2 to 3 minutes. All right, everyone, we're going to get started with today's bidders conference. So welcome and thank you for joining the FY2022 CoC Special Unsheltered Notice of Funding Opportunity Program Competition Bidders Conference, a mouthful there. Today is September 2nd, 2022, and my name is Paroma Nandi, Chief of Policy and Partnership, and I'll be presenting the materials today on behalf of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services and the Baltimore City Continuum of Care. And my colleague, Maureen Ritchie, is also present and will be here answering questions. She'll be working closely with our Continuum of Care as we prepare for our application process. So today's agenda will be doing a quick overview of the notice of funding, Baltimore City's timeline, the HUD policy priorities, our funding priorities and eligible projects, the threshold requirements, match requirements, preparing the project budget, and just a couple of application reminders. But we're also going to leave some time at today's at the end of today's webinar for a Q&A. And so we really encourage folks to wait until the end of the session to ask your questions. You can also type them in the Q&A portion of the Zoom app. And then we'll try to answer everything today. Whatever doesn't get answered within the webinar, we'll be posting an FAQ on the MOHS competition page. And again, just encouraging folks to ask your questions early, since we do have a tight timeline that we'll be going over shortly. So another just quick housekeeping, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with the slides on the MOHS website. All attendees for right now are muted to prevent background noise. As I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. We will be able to unmute you to ask those questions, or you can type those in. And then again, we can really only answer questions about the competition process and the application templates. If you have specific questions on your project, we ask that you send them specifically to the HSP applications at baltimorecity.gov inbox. So an overview of the timeline. And so what is the CoC Notice of Funding Opportunity? So that's what the NOFO stands for, Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's shorthand for annual national funding competitions. And HUD requires communities to conduct local competitions to determine which projects will be included in the CoC's application to HUD. That includes a project ranking list. The Unsheltered Notice of Funding is a new opportunity that HUD has released for the first time. It's specifically targeting addressing unsheltered homelessness in efforts to reduce unsheltered homelessness, in particularly in communities with high levels of unsheltered homelessness. And then through this special NOFO, HUD will award funding to communities that implement a coordinated approach that use housing first and public health principles to reduce the prevalence of unsheltered homelessness and improve service engagement, health outcomes, and housing stability among highly vulnerable unsheltered individuals and families. And HUD also expects within the application for communities to partner with health and housing agencies to leverage any mainstream housing and healthcare resources. Included in our CoC's application is we are required to submit an unsheltered plan. So we must submit a coordinated community plan for serving individuals and families experiencing homelessness with severe service needs. So what needs to be included in that plan? Our process of leveraging housing resources and our coordination with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, a landlord that should say recruitment, not requirement strategy, leveraging healthcare resources, our current outreach and low barrier emergency shelter strategy for individuals and families experiencing unsheltered homelessness, our current strategy to provide immediate access to low barrier permanent housing for individuals and families experiencing unsheltered homelessness, our use of data and best practices to enhance performance, ways to identify and prioritize households experiencing or with histories of unsheltered homelessness and how they access the resources that and funding that would be provided by this application. And then ensuring that individuals with lived experience of homelessness are part of all the decision making, and then supporting underserved communities and supporting an equitable community development process within the plan. So this is part of our complete application, and we'll be working on this plan as we also work on other aspects of the full application. So the timeline here, this is a shortened timeline, but there's more details in the actual RFP and guidance. But as you can see here, we've highlighted areas that folks should add to your calendar. So again, June 22nd was when HUD released the special notice of funding. August 1st is when our CoC had a planning meeting to review that notice of funding opportunity and prepare for a process to release local materials. The local competition was published on Monday, August 22nd. And there's a deadline, and this should say new projects, not renewal projects, sorry about that. All new projects are due by 5 p.m. September 16th. Again, this is a new funding opportunity, so there are no renewal projects here. September 26th is when projects that apply for funding should receive a notice of whether their project was accepted or rejected. All projects are going to be reviewed based off their threshold, off the threshold requirements, and then reviewed in detail by the Resource Allocation Committee of our Continuum of Care. That the RAC, also known as the Resource Allocation Committee, will review and rank all of the projects, and a final ranking of the projects will be sent to the CoC. Additionally, part of this application is submitting a consolidated application with narrative that will be drafted by October 5th and sent to the CoC for input and review, with the final public posting of the final consolidated application on the 18th and hopefully a submission before the 20th. It will definitely happen on or before October 20th by 8 p.m. But the goal is always to submit a day early if we can. So again, I kind of mentioned this in other slides, but the NOFO, similar to our annual notice of funding opportunity, has 3 parts. So the CoC applications, which is the CoC's overall application and primary focus on ending unsheltered homelessness. So that includes all of our strategic initiatives, how we are adopting HUD's funding and policy priorities. And that includes that service plan for serving individuals and families experiencing homelessness with a severe service need. The second part is the project ranking. So this is an ordered ranking of all the projects the CoC is submitting for application for funding. So as a provider, if your proposal is selected, it will get ranked again by that resource allocation committee. That ranking is required to be submitted to HUD. And then the project applications is the project is approved for inclusion in the local project ranking. So again, if you are a provider submitting a proposal, you'll get notice on whether your project has been approved or rejected and included in the full application. And those are the projects that will get ranked. And again, this all goes through threshold review by our office, but HUD will also complete their own threshold review and review each of the projects for competitive scoring nationally. So funding. So what do we have in funding that's available within the special NOFO? There is just over 20 million over 3 years. So there's 20 million, 33,710 dollars of unsheltered set aside amount for projects to apply for, and that's over 3 years, and a set aside planning fund of just over 600,000. So what does that mean? It means that annually we have just over 6.9 million if we are awarded the full funding for this project that we can apply for. So all project applications, we'll talk about this a little bit later, should only submit a 1-year budget with their proposal. All proposals will be calculated automatically for a 3-year grant term. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're determining how much you are applying for within funding. There really is only, under 6.9 million available for the year. And so, project applications need to be reasonably set up to account for the total amount of funding that's available annually. So how are CoC funds allocated? We talked about this just a little bit, but just some more details on this. And this is all available also within our CoC governance structure. So the Resource Allocation Committee of our CoC board oversees the development of all local notice of funding submissions. This includes developing annual or multi-year funding strategies, reading and analyzing any annual notice of funding opportunity, developing communications plans for informing our CoC, approving the final submission of the application, and overseeing the work of the collaborative applicant, which is MOHS, to prepare for that submission. So all of the work gets filtered through that resource allocation committee. And then how are funds allocated? MOHS as a collaborative applicant for the Baltimore City Continuum of Care is responsible for facilitating the local request for proposals, and then collecting, preparing data at the system level and project level for the resource allocation committee to score and rank projects, and then preparing and submitting the 3 parts of the application. So again, we work through our continuum of care to ensure that we're following the guidelines to submit the application on time. HUD policy priorities. So if you actually look through the notice of funding, you'll see there's other policy priorities, but these are the 4 that particularly relate to Baltimore City's community. So these are the 4 that we want projects to also focus on. So it's reduce unsheltered homelessness, use of housing first approach, advancing race equity, and involving a broad array of stakeholders. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about those funding priorities and the eligible projects. So within our community, ensuring permanent housing and support services are prioritized for individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness is going to be the largest priority. Just recently, within the 2022 Strategic Investment Plan, we estimated over 11,000 households reside in either encampments or unsheltered settings that include abandoned buildings and other places not meant for human habitation. And then just looking at data from the last 4 years of point in time counts, we averaged 337 individuals staying in unsheltered locations on the night of the point in time count. So again, those numbers are drastically different from each other, but wanted to point out that there is a large number of individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Again, the focus on this notice of funding opportunity is really to ensure that there's permanent housing and support services that we can secure to support, whether all or a percent of those individuals that are currently experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And then what goes into the ranking? So HUD requires communities to rank projects. COCs must review, either accept and rank or reject project applications submitted to them. And then there's a requirement for all COC written procedures that are publicly posted for all interested stakeholders and applicants that clearly describe the project level review and ranking process that is used by the COC. The written process or tool must just demonstrate its use of objective criteria. For example, the cost effectiveness, performance data, type of population served, or type of housing proposed to review, rate, and rank projects. So that hasn't been published just yet. We are working with our resource allocation committee and our COC board to approve the ranking for this unsheltered NOFO. So that will be up shortly for public review, for public posting, and will be included in the MOHS competition page. So for the FY 2022 applications, there are a number of projects that providers can apply for. So 2 different types of permanent housing, permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, street outreach, or a standalone support services only project. There'll be additional projects that only the lead agency will apply for, and that's MOHS here. And that will be a planning grant to support the planning of all of the funds that received. And there's if you remember on the table, there's a dollar amount specifically allocated to planning. It's typically 3% of whatever is awarded. So that grant will most likely be adjusted based off what HUD finally awards our community. There'll be an HMIS project to support the additional requirements and licensures for new projects, and then a support services only project for coordinated entry to support our coordinated entry or access system, as best known in Baltimore, for those additional projects. So just a little bit of details, and I'm not going to read this word for word. Again, these slides will be posted on the website shortly. Permanent supportive housing, we really encourage folks to, that are planning on applying for any of these project types to do a little bit of research before putting in a proposal. The application asks some specific questions, but we want to really, it's really important that you have a good understanding and understand best practices in serving unsheltered individuals with these housing or with these project types. So really encourage folks to do additional research outside of this presentation and outside of our resources and guidelines. So what we're specifically going to be looking for in PSH projects are what type of housing is proposed. That includes the number and configuration of units, and will that fit the needs of the program participants for the target population? What type of support services are going to be provided? ensuring that program participants are going to be assisted with accessing benefits and social and employment programs, and then ensuring that there are support services to ensure that folks can remain in their housing once they are matched to their housing. So what other services are going to be provided along the line. Additional consideration will also be made for projects that can demonstrate that up to 50% of the housing is through the utilization of housing subsidies or subsidized housing units that are not funded through CoC or ESG programs. So like an example that HUD provides are using housing choice vouchers, home art funds, or HOPWA funds. We're working specifically with our public housing authority to work through what other subsidies can be matched to programs. And so more information will be available in regards to that as we develop the plan and partnership with HABC. Similarly, rapid rehousing is also considered a permanent housing type. And we're looking at very similar aspects of this, just to note, the main difference is that the rental subsidy with rapid rehousing does end along with the support services. And so just keeping that in mind that you're using like a progressive engagement model and best practices when proposing a rapid rehousing model project. So street outreach activities are an eligible project type within this competition, which is, we don't typically see that in the annual CoC application. So this is the opportunity to increase street outreach services for Baltimore City. And so there are specific strategies that we're looking for within those projects. It's specific to reaching unsheltered individuals and families that are harder to engage with, and then strategies for providing those support services to the highest service needs. Again, making sure you're part of that proposal is how to assist those individuals and families obtain and maintain permanent housing that fits their needs, ensuring that they're getting access to the supportive services and benefits. And then all of these projects must participate within our coordinated access system as well. The next project is similar. It's a support services only, but it's standalone. So it's not connected to any housing subsidy. So the project will serve individuals or families experiencing unsheltered homelessness, but they're also able to support families that have been housed within 6 months and are now receiving permanent housing that's not necessarily PSH or rapid rehousing. So if the client was receiving PSH or rapid rehousing, they would be getting support services through that project. This is specifically to serve folks that have been housed but aren't connected to a CoC PSH or CoC rapid rehousing project and aren't receiving support services through that rental subsidy. So some examples of that standalone support services include housing navigation, childcare services for individuals and families experiencing homelessness, drop-in centers to provide support services to people experiencing homelessness, and family reunification services to reunite people experiencing homelessness with their families. So again, we want to see strategies that are going to support those with the highest service needs, ensure that the support services are available to ensure that folks can get connected to mainstream benefits, and the project is also required to participate in the coordinated access system. So those are the 4 project types: PSH, the permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, street outreach, and then the support services only that are eligible for subrecipients and providers to apply for in this application. So I'm quickly going to go over some threshold requirements. These are requirements that are set by HUD and things that HUD will also evaluate. So we're limited if your agency can't meet this threshold requirement on whether you're an eligible applicant. So it's really important to review this list. And again, there's a checklist within the guidance and RFP documentation that encourage anyone that's interested in applying to review early, because there are ways to, if you don't have one of these items, ways to ensure that you can get them in time for the deadline. So again, you need to be able to provide documentation that you're either a nonprofit exempt organization or another city government agency. You need to be able to demonstrate financial management capacity and experience to carry out the proposed project as detailed in the application. So that's part of the proposal. The population you are serving must meet the definition of homelessness under 24 CFR 578.3. And you must agree to participate in the local HMIS system. However, if you're a victim service provider, then you must also use a comparable database that meets that need for the local HMIS system. If you have questions on that, just connect with us. If you're already a HMIS participant, you can check that off the list. If you're not currently an HMIS participant, you can still apply. You just have to agree that you will use the HMIS system if you were if you are selected to receive funds. Some additional requirements that you're required is you must have a active SAM registration. Applicants, and that's with sam.gov. Applicants must provide a valid UEI number. Previously, we used to use DUNS numbers. HUD has changed their requirement to UEI. So if you have an active SAM registration, you should have that number. It should be registered and active. You need to have a good standing with the state of Maryland. So you can get that certificate from the SSTAT website, and it must be dated within 30 days of the application. We do, as long as it's active, we can accept like a screenshot as long as it's in good standing within the time frame. We require the last 2 years of single audit or independent financial audit that demonstrates the financial and management capacity of your organization. If you don't have a single audit or independent audit, and you don't meet the threshold to require that, we will look at financial statements. However, you do need to submit those in a way that they can be reviewed, and we are looking for board approved financial statements. Again, if you do not have an independent financial audit. There needs to be a commitment to operate the program under Housing First model. This is also a requirement of all CoC dollars, so documentation of at least 25% cash or in-kind match. It can be a combination. And that the project has a reasonable cost and is financially feasible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the match requirements and what is match. So match refers to cash or in-kind resources contributed to the grant. So all costs paid for matching funds must be for activities that are eligible under the CoC program, even if the recipient is not receiving CoC program grant funds for that activity. So all grant funds must be matched with an amount no less than 25% of the awarded grant amount, excluding the amount awarded for leasing budget line item, and I'll go over that in a second. And then match resources may be from public or private resources, as long as they're not prohibited by the funding agency to be used as match. And then recipients of CoC awards must document match along with their monthly expenditure reports. And that's something, again, to worry about once you get selected and or are eligible for those funds. So again, as I mentioned, every project must have a 25% match commitment. All costs under match must be for eligible activities under the CoC. So you just need to make sure that whatever match you're committing to, those are for eligible activities under the project. And then cash match and in-kind match need to be documented by a letter. We have sample letters within the RFP and guidance. And then no program income can be counted as cash match, but you must indicate that in your application, must provide a description of the source of program income and how it will be documented. In-kind contributions can include the value of any real property, equipment, goods, or services contributed to the project as match, provided that if the subrecipient had to pay for them with grant funds, the cost would have been eligible under subpart D of that CFR. And then in-kind match for services provided by a third party must also be documented with a memorandum of understanding. So any type of services that you're providing in kind. So if you're working with a partner agency and you have an agreement that they will provide support services for this project, if you're awarded, we do need to see a MOU. We will accept a letter at the proposal stage, but if you are selected for funding, you will be required to submit an MOU. So again, this is just how you calculate match. Again, it's 25% of the total award, and that includes your project admin. And I'm going to need to correct that. The project admin will be set at 10%, not 7% for all of these projects. And then if you are applying for a project with leasing, you'll minus the leasing amount for that match to calculate that. If you have questions about how to calculate your match, please email us early on so we can help you through that. But again, it's typically just 25% of the total project. And then if you are using a leasing model, you'll minus the leasing before you do that 25% calculation. Eligible cost for match. So really anything that's eligible under the CoC activities is eligible for CoC cash or in-kind match. So support services, operating, HMIS, admin, these are all eligible under CoC match. You need to just document what you're in those letters that you provide, what the match is going to be supporting. Okay, preparing the project budgets. So what to include in the project budgets, as I mentioned, the application should be for a one-year term. So if you're selected, the project will automatically be calculated for a 3-year grant term. But as you develop your budget, you should develop it for a one-year term. There's a page on the application where it talks about project staffing that should be detailed and should be aligned with the number of proposed clients served and the support services. And then within the funding request, you should include details of the project staffing in the correct line item. So you can have case managers, potentially managers for the program, admin staff, maybe data entry staff that are detailed in the project staffing. And that should be reflected within your line items for support services or admin or HMIS or any other line item that's available that requires requires a staffing component. So that should match. And then only select one. So if you're applying for a housing project, so either whether that's PSH or rapid rehousing, only select rental assistance or leasing. So if you're applying for a rental assistance model, just select rental assistance. If you're applying for a leasing model that you want to lease and have a site-based project, you'll select leasing. And if you select leasing, you can also apply for the operations to support the operations of that site or that unit or building that you plan on leasing for this project. But you can only apply for one or the other. So you shouldn't have a project application with all three items listed. So it should be either rental assistance or leasing and operations. And again, if you have questions on how to complete that budget, ask early on so we can help you with that. And then HMIS costs, if you have specific staff that will be working on data contributions or need to purchase lease equipment for data entry, that's where you would enter in HMIS costs. Baltimore covers the licensing for HMIS, so there's not a concern where you would have to purchase any licensing for the HMIS system. But again, if you have specific staff that are going to be working on the data entry, that's where you would want to enter that information in. So we've just listed some resources here. There's 3 websites. We really recommend that you go to all 3 of those. The first one is the MOHS competition page with the Unsheltered NOFO. Just note there's 2 there's 2 NOFOs on that site, One is for Unsheltered, one is for the annual NOFO, which is closed at this time, but the information is still available. So just want to make sure that you're looking at the right page. This is going to be for the special Unsheltered NOFO, which again, the deadline to apply is September 16th. We really encourage you to look at all the HUD resources that HUD has produced on their competition page. That includes reading the Unsheltered notice of funding. So if you really want to get a good sense of what our community is applying for and the general sense of what HUD is looking for in projects, we really recommend that you actually carefully review the notice of funding opportunity from HUD. And then the National Alliance to End Homelessness has a lot of great resources. It's just linked, the link right there has a good resource and a webinar attached to it. So again, more information and on their website that you can filter through. Just a couple of reminders. So again, carefully look through the competition process and timeline, the local project application guides and the notice of funding released by HUD. Again, the timeline is pretty set, so we shouldn't expect any extensions there. And I just want to make sure, folks look at the project applications ahead of time. It does take a little bit of time and effort to put the application together. We also really encourage people to, agencies to review the threshold requirements before submitting a project proposal. So make sure that your agency can check off all the boxes required for the threshold requirements. If there's something that you cannot meet, then there's concern that you won't pass the threshold review. And again, putting a project proposal is very timely and can be costly. So want to make sure agencies are well aware of what those threshold requirements are. And then again, as I mentioned, ask questions early so there's time to respond. Again, this is a new notice of funding for our community, and therefore there might be additional AAQs that we'll need to submit to HUD directly, and the response time from them is sometimes pretty slow. So again, with the deadline approaching in a couple of weeks, we really encourage you to ask those questions early, and you can submit any of those questions at HSP applications at baltimorecity.gov. That's also where you'll submit your actual application. But all of those questions should go there. And now we're going to pause for our Q&A session. I'm going to take a few minutes to see if we got questions in the chat. And then you can, I think, raise your hand and then I can unmute you and you can ask your question, and we'll do our best to answer them here today in the next 15 to 20 minutes. And then again, if your question doesn't get answered, we'll do our best to follow up with you or post it on our FAQs on the MOHS website. So I'm just going to pause and see if folks have put any questions in or give you an opportunity to raise your hand. So there's a question. So within the application, there's character limits that we listed. So the character limits are with spaces. If you go over a little bit, that's okay. We can work to edit some of the answers down. However, it's a lot over, then it makes it a little bit more challenging. One, for us to review the application, and two, for us to actually submit the application to HUD. So we ask that you try to stick within those character limits, but if you need to go over a little bit, that's okay.
Paroma, can I jump in and share just one or two things?
Yes, please, definitely.
Great. So hi, everyone. My name is Maureen. I am a consultant working with LaSar Development Consultants, helping out the city of Baltimore on this special NOFO. Really happy to be working with you guys, and also really happy to see so many people on a Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. I just wanted to call out a couple of things. So in terms of the rank and review criteria, those will be decided in the very near future by the RAC and the CoC board. But I just wanted to highlight something that Paroma has also mentioned, that if you look at the full NOFO, they are really pretty prescriptive about what they're looking for and what gets points and what doesn't. So I would definitely check that out and make sure, new projects that you're submitting can kind of tick all of those boxes that they're looking for, as well as their priority areas like advancing equity, housing first principles. Just make sure that you're able to adequately address all of those things in your application materials. And then another thing I wanted to mention is that these are really competitive funds. This is the first time they're offering such a large infusion of money. And I think there's been a lot of questions that HUD has gotten. They've done a lot of webinars. They've released a lot of FAQ documents. So also really want to encourage people to check out specifically the HUD webpage on the special NOFO. They've done webinars, they've done FAQs. There's a direct FAQ email address there as well. So if you have questions, probably other folks have had those questions as well. So there's a lot of resources out there if you want some nice dry reading over your holiday weekend. So I just wanted to call out those two things, the rank and review criteria and also the additional resources available from HUD.
And I'll just also add, we haven't listed like a maximum or a range for project budget within the guidance that we've shared. But it is just important, like as if you're interested in applying for funds, to think through there's 6.9 million annually. Obviously don't request more than that. And just thinking through that, there's going to be projects for, the planning and HMIS supports that also will be a requirement, for these for the full application. Once the resource allocation committee shares the actual rank and review, I think we'll have a better sense of what the range of projects should look like. But we are, trying to house as many folks as we can with those dollars. So just want to be it's not a lot of information, but it's just something to be mindful about when you're thinking of your project budget and what you should be applying for. Sorry if that's a little bit cryptic, but just want to make sure that, you think through those reasonable costs and things like that. There's another question here about if there's technical assistance available for any new projects. So all of these are going to be new projects since this is a new application. The technical assistance that we can provide is really if you have questions on what's eligible and what's not. I think if there are specific questions that you have, I would just email the HSP applications inbox as soon as possible, and we'll do our best to say, yes, we can answer these. No, we can't. Other than that, there's not necessarily any specific technical assistance that is being provided to individual agencies. Another question here is about if you receive rapid rehousing grants, would you be eligible to apply for standalone support service, standalone SSO project for housing navigation activities? Yeah, so you could apply for that. You just couldn't support the same households if they're receiving rapid rehousing through CoC or PSH projects. So you might need to clarify that question for us in a little bit more detail, but yeah, you could apply for those as long as it meets the eligibility criteria for that project type. So just because you're receiving separate rapid rehousing dollars doesn't mean you couldn't apply for a different activity. Oh, yeah. And I think I misspoke when I said without spaces. It's with spaces. So there are character limits on the questions, and it's with spaces that's included. And again, if you're over by a little bit, that's okay. Just try to keep it as close to those character limits as possible. So we're just gonna continue to wait for some more questions to come in. Again, you can also raise your hand, I think, and we can unmute you if you don't want to type in your question, but whatever works best for you. And again, we'll be posting this webinar, hopefully to the website today, with the slides attached, and the FAQ will probably be posted next week. Hello, can you?
Hi,
Hi,
can you hear me?
we can.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could go over the amounts that are available. Again, how much we can apply for.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's not a limit that we've addressed on how much you can apply for, but let me just go through these slides really quickly to show you the full amount of funding that we're eligible to apply for. This doesn't mean we'll receive it. Again, this is a very competitive application that's nationally set by HUD. And so this is what our community is allowed to apply for $20,641,969. But that funding is over a 3-year term. So annually, we just have just over 6.9 to apply for. As we mentioned, there's four different project types for agencies to apply for, and then 3 projects for the lead to apply for. So you want to take that into consideration on what your project budget should look like. Again, if you're applying for any type of housing, so whether that's rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, you'll just want to note that you'll use the fair market rent to calculate the units. So if you're applying for 25 units in your application, you'll want to use the fair market rent that's also set, and then multiply that by 12 to determine how much your rental assistance or leasing line items should look like. And then you want to make sure that's coupled with adequate support services. So those budgets for the housing projects should look larger, than any of the other support services projects, because it's including that rental assistance piece in there. But again, we don't have a maximum amount you can apply for, but we will be, the resource allocation will be reviewing projects for project, cost feasibility and things like that, and reasonable cost. And what, also once we publish the prioritization of how projects are selected, it might give you a better sense of how much funds you should be applying for within your proposal. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. No,
I don't know, Maureen, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. I mean, there's still 10 minutes left, so if people did want to raise hands or type in another question, there's time. But yeah, as Paroma has said, the webinar recording is going to be available along with all of the other materials that we referenced on the MOHS website. And there is an email address specific for this competition. I think it's HSP applications at baltimorecity.gov. Yep. So yeah, please feel free to be in touch anytime.
All right, I think if there are no more questions, we will adjourn this webinar. Again, thank you so much for participating today in today's bidders conference. Again, all the information is going to be posted on the MOHS website. Ask your questions to that inbox as soon as possible. The deadline is September 16th, which is, I believe, a Friday at 5 p.m. I'm just going to confirm that before. Yeah, it is a Friday. And that is coming up shortly. So make sure you get those applications in. And we look forward to reviewing them. All right. Have a great day. Enjoy your long weekend.
Thank you.